You are at a backyard barbecue somewhere in the middle of the country. It is the 4th of July, or close enough. There is a cooler by the fence, and inside it, sweating in the afternoon heat, are cans of Bud Light. On the folding table next to the grill, there is a bottle of Heinz ketchup, a package of Kraft singles still in the plastic, and a torn-open pack of Oscar Mayer hot dogs. Someone has brought a bag of Burger King Whoppers because the grill took too long to light. Every one of those products, the beer, the ketchup, the cheese, the hot dogs, the burgers in the paper wrappers, is controlled by a single investment group founded by a Brazilian former tennis player who lives in Switzerland. You have never heard his name. Almost no one at your cookout has. And that is not an accident. That is the design. His name is Jorge Paulo Lemann. He was born in Rio de Janeiro in 1939 to a Swiss-Brazilian family. His father worked in the dairy business. Lemann grew up bilingual, partly educated in Switzerland, and by his early 20s, he was good enough at tennis to represent Brazil in the Davis Cup. He played at Wimbledon. He never advanced deep in the draw, but that is not what matters about the tennis. What matters is the thing Lemann said about it later, and kept saying for the next 6 decades. Competition is the organizing principle of a life. Not money, not status, competition, the score, the win, the next match. By the mid-2020s, depending on how the stock market felt that week, Lemann's net worth hovered somewhere between $15 and $20 billion. He was, in most years, the richest person in Brazil and among the 50 wealthiest humans on the planet. And in 2015, the New York Post ran an informal survey and found that most Americans could not identify him, even when shown his photograph. Think about that for a moment. Here is what he controls. Anheuser-Busch. InBev brews roughly 1 in every 3 beers consumed on Earth. Restaurant Brands International, the holding company his group built, operates Burger King, Tim Hortons, Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen, and Firehouse Subs, totaling over 30,000 restaurants across more than 100 countries. Kraft Heinz sells products in nearly every American refrigerator. Heinz ketchup, Kraft macaroni and cheese, Oscar Mayer, Philadelphia cream cheese, Jell-O, Maxwell House, Velveeta. One man's investment group sits at the controlling or dominant shareholder position across all of it. And the way he built it has a name: zero-based budgeting. Every year, every department's budget resets to 0. You justify every dollar from scratch. No line item carries over because it existed last year. Combined with aggressive headcount reduction, typically 1 in 5 corporate employees gone within the first 2 years, and the elimination of every perk that does not directly generate revenue, this approach extracts margin from legacy companies with a discipline that borders on surgical. The question the rest of this story has to answer honestly: does this method create value, or does it hollow out beloved brands and pass the savings upward while you pay $12 for a Whopper combo? The answer, it turns out, is both. It started in 1971 in São Paulo, in a small brokerage called Garantia. Lemann was 32. He had 2 partners, Marcel Herman Teles and Carlos Alberto Sicupira. The 3 of them would work together for the next half-century. They bought Garantia when it was struggling, and they remade it in the image of a firm Lemann had studied from afar: Goldman Sachs. The partnership culture. Meritocratic, intensely competitive, partners required to invest their own money alongside the firm's. No passengers. If you imagine the office, forget the gleaming towers of Wall Street. This was São Paulo in the early 70s. Rotary phones, manual ticker tape, wide-collared shirts, and cigarette smoke. The Brazilian economic miracle was underway. Chaotic, opportunistic, full of gaps for anyone fast enough and hungry enough. Garantia became the most profitable investment bank in Brazil. But brokerages are middlemen. Lehman wanted to own things. In 1989, the trio acquired Brahma, one of Brazil's two dominant breweries. This was the first real test of the playbook at industrial scale. They installed their management culture like a new operating system. Bonuses tied to measurable targets, costs slashed across every function, underperformers removed quickly, not next quarter. Now, a decade later, in 1999, they merged Brahma with its rival Antarctica to form Ambev, the largest brewer in Latin America. And then came the move that took them global. In 2004, Ambev merged with the Belgian brewer Interbrew to form InBev. The paperwork called it a merger. Former Interbrew executives had another word for it. The Financial Times reported that the Brazilian management culture took over within months. The European way of running a brewery, collegial, traditional, unhurried, was replaced by the São Paulo way. Performance targets, cost discipline. If you could not justify the expense disappeared. Now picture 2008. The American financial system is collapsing. Lehman Brothers is dead. The stock market is in free fall. And in the middle of this, InBev launches a hostile takeover bid for Anheuser-Busch, the most symbolically American beer company in existence. Home of Budweiser, sponsor of the Super Bowl, owner of the Clydesdales. Headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri, a civic institution woven into the city's identity for over a century. The timing was not coincidental. American assets were cheap, and American institutions were at their most vulnerable. The deal closed in November 2008 for approximately $52 billion, creating Anheuser-Busch InBev, the largest beer company in world history. And if you lived in St. Louis, you felt what came next. Within the first year, roughly 1,400 jobs were cut at the former Anheuser-Busch headquarters. The fleet of private aircraft was reduced. Complimentary tickets to Busch Stadium were curtailed. Executive expense accounts were tightened. One former middle manager told Bloomberg that the free beer long provided to employees, 2 cases a month was the tradition, was restricted. The Clydesdales stayed. The corporate culture did not. You may be wondering whether this was just normal cost-cutting, the kind any acquirer does. It was not. It was zero-based budgeting applied with a rigor that the American corporate world had never seen at this scale. The concept itself was not new. A man named Peter Peer developed it at Texas Instruments in the 1970s, and Jimmy Carter championed it. But nobody had ever applied it to century-old consumer brands with this speed and this indifference to institutional tradition. The innovation was not the tool. It was the willingness to use it without flinching. 2 years later, in 2010, 3G Capital, the private equity vehicle Lehman and his partners had formally established, acquired Burger King for approximately $3.3 billion. Took it private. Then, in 2014, Burger King merged with Tim Hortons, the Canadian coffee and donut chain that Canadians love the way Americans love. Well, Budweiser. The merged company was called Restaurant Brands International, and it was headquartered in Toronto. This drew accusations of a tax inversion, moving the corporate address to benefit from Canada's lower rate. Even President Obama weighed in, speaking broadly against the practice. Think about what Burger King actually is now. American in the same way a Hollywood set is a real town. The facade faces you, the customer. Behind it, the ownership is Brazilian, the headquarters is Canadian, and the operating philosophy was forged in São Paulo. Then came the partnership that drew mainstream American attention for the first time. In February 2013, 3G Capital joined forces with Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway to acquire H.J. Heinz Company for approximately $23 billion. Buffett provided the capital and, more importantly, his credibility. When the most trusted investor in America stands beside you at the press conference, questions get quieter. Buffett called 3G's partners marvelous operators. He praised their ability to eliminate unnecessary costs. And what did elimination look like inside the Heinz headquarters in Pittsburgh? The corporate jet was sold. The executive dining room was closed. Office renovations were canceled. Employees needed approval for color printing. Roughly 7,400 jobs were cut, about 20% of the workforce. A former employee, interviewed anonymously by Forbes, described the atmosphere this way. People were crying at their desks, not because they were fired, because they saw the people next to them get fired, and they knew they were next. The ketchup kept flowing off the line. The offices above the factory floor went quiet. In 2015, 3G and Berkshire Hathaway engineered one more merger, Heinz with Kraft Foods Group, creating the Kraft Heinz Company. Annual revenue exceeding $26 billion. The third largest food and beverage company in North America. If you have opened your refrigerator this week, there is a reasonable chance you touched something they own. I need to be honest with you about something here, because the title of this video implies that Jorge Paulo Lemann is the reason your Whopper costs $12, and that is emotionally satisfying but economically incomplete. Fast food prices across the entire industry rose substantially between 2019 and 2024. Commodity inflation, labor costs rising with minimum wage hikes and post-pandemic tightness. Supply chain disruptions. Burger King's price increases were broadly in line with the industry, not dramatically above it. 3G's ownership affects corporate margins and franchise investment, but the number on the menu board is driven primarily by input costs. Saying one man made your Whopper expensive is the kind of claim that sounds right and falls apart under scrutiny. The real story is more interesting than that. The real story is about what happens to a brand when the people who own it care more about the spreadsheet than the product. Because that is what happened at Kraft Heinz. On February 24, 2019, the company disclosed a $15.4 billion write-down on the value of its Kraft and Oscar Mayer brands. In the same announcement, it revealed an SEC investigation into its accounting practices. The stock fell 28% in a single day. Buffett, characteristically restrained, told CNBC 5 words that said everything. "We overpaid for Kraft." The same scalpel that cut costs with surgical precision had eventually cut into the muscle of the brands themselves. By slashing research and development, marketing budgets, and product innovation, 3G's management had failed to invest in the things that make a brand worth buying. Consumer tastes were shifting toward fresher food, less processing, smaller, and more innovative competitors. Kraft Heinz's legacy products, Velveeta, Jell-O, Oscar Mayer Bologna, Cool Whip, were losing shelf space. Cost-cutting could extract margin from a healthy brand. It could not substitute for giving people a reason to keep buying. Kraft Heinz stock, which had traded near $97 a share in early 2017, fell below 26 by late 2019. As of recent years, it has only partially recovered. The wealth destruction was enormous, including for Berkshire Hathaway, which absorbed billions in losses. Meanwhile, on the beer side, the empire kept expanding. In 2016, AB InBev completed the acquisition of SAB Miller for approximately $107 billion, one of the largest corporate acquisitions in history. Regulators required divestitures. The U.S. Department of Justice forced the sale of SAB Miller's stake in what became Molson Coors. But the combined company still emerged dominant, holding roughly 27 to 30% of the global beer market. The next largest competitor, Heineken, holds about half that, and RBI kept acquiring too. Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen in 2017, Firehouse Subs in 2021, over 30,000 restaurants worldwide. But the franchise relationship was fraying. Between 2019 and 2022, Burger King franchisees began telling trade publications what they really thought. One told Nation's Restaurant News plainly, "We're being asked to compete with McDonald's, but they spend on their stores and we don't. The brand is being starved." In 2022, RBI announced a $400 million plan called Reclaim the Flame, investment in restaurant renovations, advertising, and menu innovation. The name itself was an admission. You do not reclaim a flame that was never in danger of going out. Here is what makes Lehman different from the other billionaires you have heard of. He does not want you to know his name. He has given very few interviews in English. He has no social media presence. He has lived in Switzerland for decades, not in a flashy compound, but in the kind of discreet, expensive Swiss property where wealth goes to be invisible. He does not show up on magazine covers. He does not tweet. He does not testify before Congress. He built one of the largest consumer product empires in human history, and he did it in a way that left his face out of it entirely. And here is the deepest irony. Lehman modeled his entire approach on American ideas. The Goldman Sachs partnership culture he observed as a young man. The management philosophy of Jim Collins, the American business author he admired so much, he hired him as an advisor. He used American business theory to acquire American companies more efficiently than American management had ever run them. The student outperformed the teacher, and the teacher never noticed. I want to ask you something. Have you ever been to a Burger King, or opened a bottle of Heinz ketchup, or cracked a Bud Light at a barbecue and thought about who owns this? Most people have not. And that gap between how familiar these brands are and how invisible their ownership is, that gap is the story. Not a conspiracy, not a scandal. A fact about how modern capitalism actually works, about how the things that feel most American can be controlled by people who feel no obligation to be American about it. If this history intersected your life, if you worked at Heinz in Pittsburgh, or drank Brahma in Sao Paulo, or watched the Clydesdales in the Super Bowl, knowing the company behind them had already changed hands, tell us about it. What did it feel like from where you were standing? There is a debate in business schools that will probably never be settled. One side says 3G saw what was true about these companies, that they were bloated, overstaffed, coasting on brand inertia, and that the cost-cutting was necessary medicine. The other side says 3G strip-mined decades of accumulated brand value for short-term profit and left the carcasses behind. The Kraft Heinz write-down is Exhibit A for the second school. AB InBev's continued dominance of global beer is Exhibit A for the first. Both are true. That is the part most people cannot hold. Lehman is in his mid-80s now. His partners Teles and Sicupira are in the same generation. The empire they built is not going anywhere. It is too large, too embedded in the supply chains and refrigerators and fast food strips of the world to unwind. The question is not whether they changed the landscape. They did. The question is what kind of landscape they left. You are back at that barbecue. The sun is going down. Someone hands you a Bud Light. You squeeze Heinz ketchup onto a Kraft-wrapped burger. You bite into it. It tastes the same as it always did. But now you know something you did not know this morning. Every one of those brands was acquired, restructured, and optimized by a man who learned American capitalism better than American capitalists, applied it more ruthlessly than they had the nerve to, and never once asked for your attention while he did it. He did not need you to know his name. He just needed you to keep buying the ketchup. The next time you pick up that red bottle, you will think of him. Jorge Paulo Lemann, the most important businessman in your kitchen you never knew existed. And the question that will not leave you, the one that has no clean answer, is whether the brands he bought are better for his ownership, or whether they just look the same on the outside while something essential, something that was built over generations by people who cared about the product and not just the margin, has been quietly, efficiently, and permanently removed. That question is not about one man. It is about what we have decided companies are for. And every time you open your refrigerator, you are living inside the answer.